Up until the half of the 20th century, deploying female soldiers onto the battlefield was something that military powers did not rely on. The bloody task of fighting and advancing on enemy lines was left to the males to carry out. However, during the battles between Germany and the Soviet Union, the Russians needed all the power they could get to withstand the push of the Germans, so they deployed thousands of women onto the battlefield as forward operations units. But what exactly happened to these battle-hardened women? When on June 22, 1941, the German army began Operation Barbarossa, their invasion of the Soviet Union, they were confronted with a unique situation not seen in their previous battles in Poland, France, or the Low Countries: the presence of female enemy combatants. The war on the Eastern Front was a clash of ideologies, with German National Socialism on one side and Soviet communism on the other. The animosity between the two sides was much more intense than the conflicts between the Germans and the Brits or French troops in the West. The Nazi propaganda actively portrayed the Soviet population as inferior Slavic subhumans, leading to widespread cruelty and suffering. People like them were thought to be critical of their military and their government, having a mostly male-dominated hierarchy. The Germans were soon about to learn that this indeed wasn't the case.
Let's unveil the secrets of time.
Contrasting views: women in combat on the Eastern Front. Around 800,000 women served in the Soviet Union's army in the war. Their numbers were concentrated in support areas like medical units and paramedics, and very few of them, roughly 2,500, were allowed ranks in the infantry. But the few numbers that were in the attack forces made a name for themselves with their astonishing feats. One such woman, who was titled a hero, was Manshuk Mamatova, a machine gunner from Kazakhstan. She was also the very first Asian woman to receive the title Hero of the Soviet Union because of her valor on the field. In her last stand, she eliminated nearly 70 enemy combatants, even after getting mortally wounded by oncoming bullets. The Soviet women were soldiers of honor and pride, worthy of receiving the merits that they did. As the Germans pushed eastward, they were particularly repulsed by the fact that the Red Army employed women in combat roles. They couldn't stand the fact of being pushed back by females and felt that certain roles that were set in stone were being broken. This practice stood in stark contrast to the Nazi Party's beliefs about the appropriate roles and positions of women in society. Throughout the war, the Germans were compelled to enlist hundreds of thousands of women to free up more men for combat units. However, with a few exceptions, these women served in non-combat roles such as nurses, clerks, drivers, searchlight operators, and other support positions. The Germans firmly believed that the front lines were not suitable for women. However, the personnel still required as much assistance as they could receive while fighting in the war. As such, women were generally classified into reconnaissance tasks like telephone operators, messengers, meteorologists, and other similar tasks. The Soviets had a similar belief because the men were considered the hunters and gatherers in their community. But as the German forces advanced and the Soviets saw their numbers drop, some rules and ideologies just had to be remade. Initially, many women were denied the opportunity to serve in the military when the Germans attacked the Soviet Union in June 1941. However, as the war progressed and the Soviet Union faced heavy losses, attitudes towards women in the military shifted. Women who wished to fight were increasingly allowed to do so, leading to the establishment of female regiments and the inclusion of women in combat missions. These female operatives, although fewer than the males, were able to match the Germans and fought bravely with their male brethren in every skirmish. Seeing them in action changed the Soviets' conceited beliefs, and they began to see the takeaways from the newly acquired infantry. The women of the female brigade fought with courage and determination, pushing forward in the face of danger and adversity. Their sacrifices and contributions were instrumental in turning the tide of the war, as they played a vital role in defeating the Nazi invaders. The Soviet Union regarded men and women as essentially equal, allowing women to bear arms and fight alongside men in defense of the homeland. They also served in various military roles, like those in the German, British, and American armed forces. Soviet female soldiers were even tasked with manning anti-aircraft batteries. The females weren't just bringing down birds from the sky, they were also taking to it. The ones that did went down in history as legends for their oncoming generations, leaving stories that would be told again and again. Women warriors of World War II, defying expectations and derogatory labels. Women have always been receiving the short end of the stick when it comes to taking up important roles in society. The male mindset governed states, and women were, at best, their advisors. Even during the war, females were mistreated and were kept from doing anything that the males would do. They faced derogatory remarks and had hideous nicknames given to them by their own comrades as well as by the enemy. Little did they know that these so-called Flintenweiber were heroes of war, and later were pedestaled with the highest praises from all over the world. A battalion was created in 1942 by the Soviets called the First Separate Women's Volunteer Rifle Brigade, and it deployed thousands of women onto the battlefield in combat roles. Up until its dissolution in 1944, it continuously produced laurels and was commandeered, maintained, and kept alive by Soviet female soldiers. During World War II, in 1942, some women served as fighter and bomber pilots. One notable squadron, dubbed the Night Witches by the Germans, gained attention for their nighttime bombing raids. The Night Witches were simply one of the many squadrons that had women soldiers in it, and they proved to be just as devastating as male soldiers, defying the single-minded beliefs of all parties involved in the war at the time. They flew thousands of missions, dropping bombs on enemy targets and disrupting supply lines with pinpoint accuracy. Their bravery and tenacity earned them numerous accolades and decorations, including the prestigious Order of the Red Star.
We didn't see ourselves as heroes. We were just doing our duty, fighting for our homeland and for the freedom of our people.
As the war raged on, the Night Witches continued to fly night after night, their courage inspiring others and striking fear into the hearts of the enemy. These Soviet females were not just fearsome machinists, but even on the field with weapons in their clutches, they put down opposing forces with ease. These Soviet women distinguished themselves as snipers, earning fearsome reputations and high kill counts. Nearly 2,500 female snipers served during the war, leaving their mark as some of the most notorious, accurate, and devastating soldiers, and inscribing their reputation as deadly combatants. Lyudmila Pavlichenko, for instance, achieved a remarkable feat with 309 confirmed kills. Another careful and painfully precise warrior was Rosa Shanina. She was known for her skills on the field, making long-range confirmed targets. One thing she was great at was making doublets. She'd fire 2 shots in quick succession and land both for confirmed kills.
We were trained to be patient and disciplined, to wait for the perfect moment to take our shot. It was a lonely and dangerous job, but we were proud to serve our country.
These women played a crucial role in disrupting enemy movements, providing intelligence to their comrades, and instilling fear in the hearts of the Nazi invaders. With their Mosin Nagant rifles in hand, they stalked their prey with silent precision, striking with deadly accuracy from hidden positions. The Nazis quickly learned to fear the Soviet snipers, who were responsible for inflicting heavy casualties and sowing chaos among enemy ranks. Overall, nearly 1 million Soviet women served during the war. Although most of them were designated in support and medical roles, the few that manned the guns on the front lines were integral in defending their motherland and preventing the advance of the Nazis. But because of the single-minded and male supremacy beliefs of the Russians and Germans, the female soldiers weren't taken to very kindly by either side. Despite their contributions, the idea of women taking up arms was strongly opposed by the traditional German mindset. When female Soviet soldiers were captured by the Germans, derogatory terms like rifle broads were used, reflecting the Germans' disdain for women in uniform. Many male soldiers doubted the abilities of their female counterparts, believing that women were not capable of handling the physical and mental demands of combat. This skepticism often manifested in comments implying that women were not as skilled or competent as men in military roles. Female soldiers were subjected to derogatory language and insults based on their gender. These insults aimed to undermine their authority and belittle their contributions to the war effort. Terms such as weak, inferior, or insulting slurs were not uncommon. The female soldiers who were placed in charge of regiments or were assigned squad leaders had it the worst. The males under their wing could not bear to receive orders from a rifle broad, so they would go against their assigned directives as an act of mutiny. Some male soldiers refused to follow orders from female officers, questioning their competence solely based on their gender. Despite everything that they accomplished for their motherland, these female Soviet soldiers were later put through inhuman suffering and torture by the Germans and their own comrades. Silenced heroes, the persecution of Soviet female soldiers in World War II. In the eyes of the German military, Soviet female soldiers symbolized the decay of communism and were seen as representatives of evil. Despite the predominantly male composition of the Red Army, there were also female troops, many of whom continued to fight behind German lines during the fluid battles of 1941 to 42. The Germans had a harsh stance on what they called partisans, ruthlessly hunting them down and executing them. Soviet women in uniform were also targeted and depicted as degenerates, capable of committing brutalities against German soldiers. Marking them as dangerous and subhumans, the Germans had gotten their excuse to murder these women in cold blood, and they were quick to make sure that they used the now given opportunity to wipe out as many as they could. This sentiment wasn't exclusive to the Nazis, but extended to the regular German army, which resented women entering the male-dominated military sphere. The only group of Soviet women largely spared were army nurses, recognized for their non-combatant role. Early in the German invasion, on June 29, 1941, Field Marshal Gunther von Kluge, commanding the Fourth Army, issued a directive stating, "Women in uniform are to be shot." Although this order was later rescinded, the example was already set in stone, and some individual German commanders continued to issue similar illegal orders for dealing with Soviet female troops. Many women joined the partisans, serving on the front lines and sabotaging German communications, sometimes deep behind enemy lines. In the partisans, women were considered equals and fought alongside men as regular soldiers and guerrilla fighters. The female Soviet partisans were a diverse group, including women from all walks of life. They came from cities, towns, and villages across the occupied territories, united by a common desire to fight back against the brutal Nazi regime. Operating deep behind enemy lines, these women faced constant danger and hardship as they carried out acts of sabotage, intelligence gathering, and guerrilla warfare.
We knew the risks, but we were willing to do whatever it took to resist the invaders and protect our homeland.
Some women who participated in partisan activities were executed, including Lepa Radic, a young girl who sabotaged German operations. Despite being tortured and given the opportunity to betray her comrades, she refused and was publicly hanged by German officers. She stood on a box, the noose tight around her neck, given one last chance to talk, but she remained silent, and the box was kicked away. Another brave partisan, Zoya Kosmodemyanskaya, only 18 years old, met a similar fate at the hands of the Germans. She volunteered for the partisans, operating behind enemy lines in German-occupied territory. Captured during a mission near a village, she endured torture and humiliation, but refused to betray her fellow partisans. Sentenced to death, her final defiant words to the crowd were, "There are 200 million of us. You can't hang us all," before she was hanged. These women became heroes of the Soviet Union and were legends in their own ways. This shows that despite the unending torture from both sides of the war, they kept fighting, and even when they were given the choice of sitting out or even participating in less risky jobs like nursing or messaging, they refused. But once the Germans captured these warriors, the recorded atrocities committed against them are nothing short of difficult to recall. Tragic orders: the fate of Soviet women in German hands during World War II. General Ernst Hammer, commanding the 75th Infantry Division, issued specific orders for dealing with captured partisans, women soldiers, and Soviet military commissars. They were all to be executed, with female soldiers to be killed immediately after capture. The captured were treated as nothing more than dead meat. Additionally, the commander of the 4th Panzer Division expressed the view that partisans and female soldiers should not be kept in prisoner-of-war camps, but should instead be hanged from the nearest tree. German units followed these orders, resulting in the immediate killing of Soviet female troops from the outset of the invasion. Following Field Marshal Kluger's illegal order on June 27th, the 122nd Infantry Division reported, as an example, that they had executed 30 female Soviet soldiers captured by one of their units. It's important to note that while these German units were capturing male Soviet soldiers, with exceptions made for partisans and political commissars, the prisoners of war were subjected to horrific maltreatment in largely open-air camps, where they were systematically starved and abused. This included instances of German soldiers throwing scraps of food to starving Soviet prisoners for amusement. The regular German army carried out all these actions. They took part in the systematic killing and abuse of the female Soviets and made sure to send a message with every kill. Unspeakable suffering, more of the horrors that happened under German captivity. During the war, 6 million Soviets were taken prisoner by the Germans, and tragically, 3 million of them died while in captivity. Not all female Soviet soldiers were immediately executed. Many endured horrific sexual assaults before being killed. The treatment of Soviet female soldiers varied depending on specific circumstances and individuals involved. Everyone had their own way of dealing with these female Soviets, and none of them were gentle. Some issued orders to have them killed via starvation. Others had them sexually abused to death. Most German commanders simply issued direct execution orders. Some even forced the female Soviets into prostitution. Some female soldiers carried a ration of a deadly poison to be swallowed in event of capture. The members of the women regiments, which were constantly increasing, agreed that death is to be preferred to the fate they would probably meet at the hands of the Germans. While many faced severe mistreatment, there were instances where German soldiers displayed humanity and compassion towards their female captives, offering them better treatment or shielding them from abuse. However, such occurrences were relatively rare in the broader context of the war. Some captured Soviet women, along with other civilians, were deported to concentration camps or forced labor camps where they endured appalling conditions, including overcrowding, malnutrition, and disease. Many died because of these harsh conditions. Many female soldiers were captured and handed over to the SS because the army lacked facilities for female prisoners of war. These unfortunate women often ended up in Ravensbrück, Germany's largest concentration camp for women, or Auschwitz-Birkenau women's camp. At one point or another, about 18,000 Soviet female prisoners of war were held at Ravensbrück. Faced with the prospect of imminent capture, many Soviet women soldiers chose to take their own lives. While the Germans executed thousands, many more endured unspeakable tortures. Many captured Soviet women were subjected to forced labor, working in factories, farms, or other industries to support the German war effort. Conditions were often harsh, with long hours, minimal food and shelter, and little regard for their well-being. That was the final fate of the female warriors of the Soviet Union. They were formidable on the field, with many going down as legends and heroes of the Soviet Union. However, the societal norms and the move away from predetermined gender roles subjected these soldiers to extreme brutality at the hands of their enemies and their comrades. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to our channel for more historical content. Thank you for watching.